Found out my boyfriend avoids kids due to losing his niece in a tragic accident, and now I'm unsure how to help him heal. I, 27F, have been with my boyfriend, 28 male, J, for 5 years. We've both been very close with each other's families, and we've even talked about marriage. However, one touchy subject is children. Whenever we discuss it, he gets kinda standoffish. He doesn't really dismiss the idea though, it's just that he doesn't seem invested. I've always wanted kids, and he just always says he's fine with whatever makes me happy. Ever since, I've been content with this situation. However, things escalated during this holiday season. Our setup has always been that Jay spends Christmas Eve and dinner with my family, then I spend Christmas Day with his family. This was the first Christmas I'll spend with my first and only niece, 2F, Anna. She spent her first Christmas in the hospital due to her health condition, but she's okay now, so I made sure to spend a lot of time with her. We played a lot, we opened gifts together, and I even reenacted Anna's favorite storybook using her favorite doll. We even had matching outfits. My sister, 30F, Amy, thanked me for giving her and her husband some relief from childcare the entire day. However, Amy also said she noticed that Jay, who was just either sitting on the couch watching me or helping my mom with the dishes, was kinda distant with Anna. I told her I've also noticed that before, and I just chalked it up to maybe Jay was hesitant and awkward to play with Anna because he feels he's just my boyfriend. Then Amy said she won't mind, since she and her husband already treat Jay as part of our family. I then went back to Jay and encouraged him to play with Anna and help us set up her new dollhouse, but he said he's not feeling too well. He ended up drinking a few more beers and stayed on the porch by himself, scrolling on his phone. I didn't press harder and thought he might really just be feeling under the weather. I just want to add for context that Jay isn't an alcoholic. He's a sweet, wonderful, funny man who's sometimes broody and deep in thought, but he's never abusive, manipulative, or moody, and he only drinks on special occasions. The next day, on Christmas Day, we had lunch with Jay's family. Afterward, I volunteered for cleanup to help Jay's mom, 62F, Mary, and brother, 31M, John. Jay's family was the best any significant other could ever ask for. They're very sweet and supportive of us, but they're never prying. They always check up on us, but they never overstep. So, as we were cleaning up, Mary asked me how my sister's baby was. They helped with the bills when Anna was hospitalized last year. I told them that Anna's in great condition now, and that she already spent the Christmas at home. They were very delighted upon hearing this. Then, I shared with them the thing I noticed about Jay. Initially, I thought maybe Mary could just give me advice on how to approach the issue with Jay since he's clearly not the playing with kids kind of guy. But then John casually said something like, "Oh, because of Rosie," then Mary quickly shushed him. Rosie was the daughter of Jay and John's eldest sister, Beth, 35F. I never knew the actual details because everyone was very secretive about it, but all I knew was that Rosie passed away when she was just 3 years old and Beth and her husband moved away afterward. I never met them in person. So, later that night, when Mary, John, and the other family members got a bit more drunk and Jay was already sleeping in the bedroom, they told me the story. I didn't force them or anything. Apparently, Jay, being the youngest of the siblings, was really close with Rosie back then. Jay was just around 14 years old when Rosie was born, so he became the super fun uncle, like I am now with Anna. He was actually Rosie's best friend. Then, on summer of 2012, Jay was playing with Rosie outside. He was blowing bubbles and she was chasing and popping them, when a speeding car, driven by a woman who was distracted on her phone, skidded into the yard toward Rosie's direction. Jay reacted quickly and was able to reach and grab Rosie so the car actually hit him, but the impact of the crash caused Rosie's head to whiplash as Jay hugged her. Jay was in a coma for 3 days and had multiple severe injuries and internal bleeding, but Rosie didn't make it. Everything was caught by the neighbor's CCTV so everyone knew that Jay was a hero for trying to protect Rosie. It was even covered by the local news, but Beth, who was understandably in grief, resented Jay for not being able to save her daughter. Beth and her husband then decided to move to another country to cope with their grief and start a new life, and they've had minimal contact with the family ever since. Jay, meanwhile, took the loss really hard. He blamed himself for not being able to save Rosie and not being able to attend her funeral since he was still at the hospital at that time. Mary said that Jay was never the same after that. He never went near kids, and he became a lot colder, quieter, more reserved, and antisocial. He also had anger issues, but it, thankfully, went away. I haven't had any issues with this. We also live in an area where people don't believe in therapy, so Jay never received professional help. After learning all of this, I bawled my eyes out because I never knew Jay was carrying such a heavy burden. The whole incident became a taboo family secret that no one mentions in fear of Jay breaking down or doing something he might regret, although to be fair, he's never had violent or self-harm tendencies ever since, so this was just a precaution. They also never told me before because they assumed Jay would be the one to tell me, but I told them that he never did, and that I never really asked him. I then thanked everyone for letting me in on this, and I told them that I'd talk to Jay about it when the time is right. They understood, and they said I could just ring them up if I need help or support in any way. For now, I just want Jay to enjoy the holidays and his remaining vacation days from work. Now, I don't really know how to start with him. I know seeking professional help to process all the trauma and grief, even if it's been over a decade ago, would be the top priority, but I don't know how to bring it up to him. I don't even know when is the right time to bring it up. I just want him to know that I love him no matter what, and that I'll support him in every step toward his healing, especially if we're to form a family of our own. Update 1. I took some time to organize my thoughts first to make sure I don't miss anything pertinent. It's kinda long as a lot have happened since, so I've divided this into sections to make it easier to follow. Quick recap: my boyfriend, Jay, and I have been together for 5 years. Throughout our relationship, I noticed that he's always distant with kids, including my niece, Anna. During Christmas, Jay's family revealed that it was because of an incident over a decade ago. Turns out, Jay was really close with his toddler niece, Rosie. One day, when they were playing outside, they were hit by a distracted driver. Jay tried to save Rosie. He sustained severe injuries, but Rosie still didn't make it. Beth, Rosie's mom and Jay's sister, acted cold toward Jay after this, then she and her husband moved to another country after a few months. From then on, Jay's personality changed, becoming cold and antisocial, and he never received professional help. All of this has become Jay's family's dirty secret. Part 1. The confession. Since learning about Rosie and posting here on Reddit, I've been so conflicted about what to do. A lot of you had opposing opinions, and all of them had merit, but knowing Jay and how he'd most likely react, I chose to keep it a secret until I find the perfect time. What I didn't anticipate was that the perfect time would come in the form of a pregnancy scare. Back in January, I had a false positive. Everything happened so quickly within a day. I had a roller coaster of emotions, but bottom line was that I'm not pregnant after all. When Jay got back home that night, I knew I had to tell him everything. I told him I had a pregnancy scare, but he has nothing to worry about since it ended up being negative. At that moment, I saw all the blood drain from his face, and he became so pale that I was worried he was going to faint. I was holding his hand, and he became so sweaty and cold and shaky. He rushed to our refrigerator to get some water, and it was obvious he was spiraling really hard. That was when I told him I knew about Rosie. I came clean because I knew that was what he was panicking about. I assured him that I'm by his side, and he could react however he wanted to. I repeatedly apologized for disrespecting his trust and lying to him for weeks. I also asked him to please not be mad at his family because they meant well when they told me. Throughout all of it, I couldn't really read Jay's expressions. I wasn't sure if he was about to scream out of anger or burst into tears. I told him that we don't have to talk about it any further if he doesn't want to, but I'd be willing to listen and support him whenever he's ready. His only response that time was him asking me if I wanted to break up with him, which confused me. I told him of course not, then we hugged, then he said he needs some time to process everything before we discuss it, which I respected. For the rest of the week, we tried to interact like nothing happened, but everything was awkward since there's this huge thing hanging between us. Part 2, the talk. The following weekend, which was 8 days after, we finally sat down and talked about everything. He started by apologizing for not telling me sooner, but he revealed that his last girlfriend dumped him after he told her about Rosie. He said he was so relieved after I reassured him that I wouldn't do that. He then told me that it was something that's been weighing him ever since, and he's confirmed that he never sought or received professional help. However, he said he's very much open to doing that, but he didn't think he's ready yet. He also said he's afraid to go down that path because it might release some inner demons and drag me down with him. Another thing Jay told me was that ever since Rosie was born, he felt an instant and deep connection and a sense of responsibility for her, even when he was just a teenager that time. He said that having Rosie in his life made him realize how much he wanted to be a father when he's older. However, since the incident, he's afraid of messing things up again, so he never really considered having kids from then on despite really wanting to do so. I then reassured him that we're on the same page on this. Although I also want to have kids with him in the future, I don't want to force it on him when he's not yet ready. He also said that whenever he sees me with Anna, my niece, he gets kinda jealous because he wants to join us every time. However, he constantly reminds himself to keep his distance just to be safe. I told him he doesn't have to worry about that, and that he's more than welcome to join us if he wants to. I also told him that my sister and the rest of my family actually considers him a part of our family, just to reassure him more. Jay tried to lighten the mood by joking and saying now that I know everything about him and still didn't break up with him, I could finally expect a proposal anytime soon. We both had a good laugh, but we agreed to wait for his recovery first before getting engaged or discussing our future family. Part 3, Beth. During our discussion, Jay also had another heartbreaking revelation. He said that during the height of the pandemic, Beth's husband, Brian, reached out to him. Brian said that Beth had COVID and was confined in a hospital, and that he was already running low on funds due to bills and unemployment. He also said that Beth had been almost catatonic since Rosie's passing. She had been resistant to any outside and professional help, but she was institutionalized for about a year after a self-harming incident. For the past decade, she'd been cold, distant, and withdrawn from society. Apparently, the rest of Jay's family also knew about all this, but again, they just swept it under the rug. To be fair, they had been helping Brian by sending financial aid to support Beth, but their version of the story was that Beth had just gone low contact since they moved. Also, to be very clear, Jay said that Beth never blamed him for what happened to Rosie, although he initially felt that way when he was younger. It was more of their parents interpreting and spinning things a certain way to avoid tarnishing their family's reputation, but when Brian reached out to him directly years ago, he started to understand better. However, he still hasn't processed everything, and he still partly blames himself for the whole thing. Part 4. Our current situation for now. What we're exploring is couples therapy so we can discuss our mutual issues in a safe and pressure-free space, and hopefully, kind of ease him into the world of therapy. We've already found the perfect therapist to help us, and we've now had 6 sessions with her. From what I can tell, Jay seems a lot happier and less burdened. We've also had homeworks from our sessions, and Jay was even the one reminding me to do them. Right now, I'm just hoping that he becomes ready enough to open up about Rosie so he can heal and recover from his trauma. Not for me, but for his mental and emotional well-being. No rush though, all in his own time. Also, Jay has no social media, but I showed him the original Reddit post I made. He spent like 3 hours reading through all the comments. It was the first time I saw him get teary-eyed because he never expected so many people giving him support and saying kind words to him. He was extremely overwhelmed by everyone's kindness, so we're both grateful to all of you for that. We also saw some TikTok and YouTube versions of the story, and you bet Jay browsed through all of them. He's still baffled why the TikTok versions have Minecraft or cooking videos in the background, but I just told him it's a trend, haha. So, there, if you've made it this far into our story, thank you for your time. I have a good feeling that Jay and I are going to be fine. We still have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but here's to hoping for the best. Edit. So Jay and I now kinda share this account. Now on to second story. Suspected our important meetings were being derailed by a mysterious boardroom farter, and discovered it was one of our senior executives. I work in upper middle management at a large business and entertainment events company, and recently we got back to regular face-to-face client meetings. Over the last few weeks, we've been having some intense and lengthy meetings in our office with a potential local client, which could really take our company to the next level if it works out. However, a rather awkward problem has arisen. During these meetings, which tend to last all afternoon, someone breaks wind, silently, usually more than once. The odor is, frankly, overwhelming, yet there is not much in the way of any clear reaction from anyone in the room. I have noticed some people very discreetly eye each other suspiciously. But it's quite a formal and stiff atmosphere, with several very serious and no-nonsense senior executives present from both sides, so it appears if people are just doing their best to ignore this rude interruption. During one of the wind-breaking incidents, a junior member of staff sat with her elbow on the table and put her hand over her hand and mouth, trying to make it look like she was just resting her head, while another junior member looked uncomfortable but kept her head down and stared at her notepad. On another occasion I noticed one of the clients frowning and looking out of the corner of their eye, but frankly I dare not catch anyone's eye, so I always quickly avert my gaze to avoid any awkwardness or, God forbid, suspicion. Everything at our company is businesslike and relations are generally good. I know everyone reasonably well on our side, so I had assumed the culprit was from the would-be client's team. But imagine my horror when, after the clients had left our last meeting leaving our team to continue the discussion among ourselves, the silent boardroom farter struck again. I was incredulous. There were 3 senior male executives in the room and 2 junior female members of staff who were not always present at other meetings. So I am fairly certain the culprit is a senior management figure at our firm. I'm completely at a loss as to how to deal with this. I'm quite ambitious and have invested a lot of energy into making this project happen. So I can't believe that a senior company member is behaving in such a rude manner and potentially jeopardizing it by acting so unprofessionally towards potential partners. The potential clients cannot have possibly failed to notice the smell, and I can only assume they are simply being polite and professional by ignoring it. However, I am just afraid that there are limits to anyone's tolerance and that sooner rather than later they will decide in one way or another to end their interest in working with us. This is just such a strange problem. How on earth can voice my concerns to my superiors? Update 1. So there were another 4 to 5 meetings. The farting continued. In some meetings it was worse than others. It did seem that those scheduled in the morning were less gassy affairs, although by no means did attendees enjoy fresh air for the entire duration of those. Despite the regular bouts of nostril-burning flatulence wafting throughout the room, it became clear we were going to be working with this client on a long-term basis, and the atmosphere grew a little more relaxed accordingly. On one occasion near the end of a meeting someone cracked a very funny joke, which provoked an outburst of communal laughter, during which someone, presumably involuntarily, let out an audible fart. It was short, not very loud, and if anyone noticed it they didn't let on. However, whilst I couldn't be sure if everyone heard it, it was certainly smelt by everyone. The eye-wateringly foul stench wiped the smiles off some faces and replaced the amused expressions of a few others with frowns. This seemingly brought this particular meeting to a slightly premature end as the most senior member of the client team rose to his feet and said without a hint of irony, "Well, that's probably as good a note as any to end on for today." It was unclear if he was referring to the funny joke cracked moments earlier or the fart. Indeed, he seemed a very sharp individual who probably realized it was a perfect moment for ambiguity. But I have to admit the sight of everyone's eyes darting around the room as people tried to gauge each other's reactions to try and figure out exactly what he meant was an amusing one. but not as amusing as moments later watching senior management leaning over the table exchanging farewell platitudes and shaking hands whilst yet another stinking fart assaulted everyone's noses. It got to the point where people let their guard down a bit and became a little less restrained in hiding their reactions. An electric fan mysteriously appeared in the corner of meeting room one day, but it wasn't used for the first meeting it appeared in, probably as it was an early morning affair with limited silent and deadly emissions. But during one particularly gassy afternoon episode a week later, one of the clients, a younger female, was sat with the corners of her mouth pointing downwards and using a piece of A4 to fan the air, trying to make it look like she was just trying to cool her face. Our director saw this, and asked the junior member sitting nearest the new fan to switch it on please. Seems it's getting a little hot in here with a completely straight face. On the fan went, but the speed was set on a higher speed than anticipated and all that happened was pieces of paper, meeting notes, and a newspaper were blown off the table and flew around the room along with the familiar pungent stench. Thankfully this was laughed off, and I took advantage of the interruption to suggest a break, as we left the office juniors to clear up the chaos. During the unplanned interval, I noticed our most senior executive had hung back to help reorganize the room. This was most out of character, but it turned out he just wanted to get the newspaper, which had been blown inside out. Seconds later he emerged from the room and walked towards the gaggle of us who were drinking coffee and chatting, in the open plan area outside the meeting room. He radiated a beaming smile as he strode right past everyone in the direction of the men's restroom with the newspaper tucked under his arm. Seeing that he didn't return to the meeting room for a good 10 minutes after everyone else had, it didn't take Sherlock Holmes to deduce why he had been so eager to get his hands on some reading material. This brazen and unashamed approach to bathroom business quickly led me to place him in the number 1 position on the silent boardroom farter suspect list. I also especially noted there were no more silent but deadly interruptions for the remainder of that meeting, which went on for a further 3 hours or so. During our very last meeting, which was to seal the deal, there was an awkward culture clash. We work in a multinational office in a major Asian city. English is the working language, and between us and the client team everyone speaks English fluently, but there is a varying mix of comprehension of our host country's language. All of our senior executives are Westerners and unable to converse in the local language. I'm not a local but I'm fluent in the local lingo. During the meeting, 2 maintenance men wearing overalls entered the room and announced they were responding to a report of a fault in the ventilation system. But both the workers were not fluent in English, so I did some on-the-spot interpretation, to which our most senior executive replied, "Please tell the janitors the air con and ventilation system are working fine, we have important business to conclude today." I duly interpreted. But the workman, not at all concerned with the subtleties of boardroom etiquette, bluntly replied in the local vernacular, "There's no ventilation problem? It smells like shit in here." Which basically caused the half of the room who could understand to laugh and the other half to respond with smiles and looks of curiosity as to what exactly was said. Thinking on my feet I didn't translate anything back to my side, but urged the maintenance guys to come back in a few hours because it was a really important meeting and we really had to get on with it. It was a ruse which seemed to impress the client executive who was also fluent in that language, and offered my side a way to continue without drawing more attention to the constant bad smells than was necessary. The deal ended up being signed off and it was decided both teams would go out for dinner and drinks to celebrate. Sure enough the drinks flowed and both sides let their hair down as the night drew on. Whilst chatting with one of the clients, someone of similar level to myself, and with a few drinks in me, I couldn't help but bring up the farting issue. The client replied, "Oh, that was our boss, we're so sorry about that. He's a great guy but sits there in our office telling dick and fart jokes all day. He says it's an example of thinking out of the box to make our team more relaxed, comfortable with each other. So after each meeting we were telling him to quit passing gas. He would deny it each time but the whole thing had just become a running joke for our team so we just rolled with it, sorry." Very surprised by this revelation, and at the level of humor coming from such an otherwise professional and serious team, I felt it best to just laugh it off and not reveal real source of the reek. But emboldened by this, days later I ran into our senior executive's PA, who was usually in the meetings, and asked her straight up if the guy had a wind problem. "Oh yeah," she replied, "I'm glad my desk is outside, he just sits and farts in his office room all day and just doesn't care." I ended up feeling like I was the one who had the problems all along, a keener sense of smell than most, not especially amused by fart jokes, and a little naive. Seniority level and attitude to public farting are not necessarily linked. So there were 2 farters? Fart twist. A Shyamalan-worthy twist, indeed. Wait, I thought that the ops senior executive was the farter, but the client's team assumed that their boss was the farter because he tells fart jokes all day as some sort of management technique, which is a whole other world of hurt. So the client's team's boss is being falsely accused of being the farter. Rereading it, you could be totally right. Op says I felt it best to just laugh it off and not reveal real source of the reek, so she probably shares your interpretation. On the other hand, the client seemed very sure of themselves and the fact that boss denied it doesn't really mean anything, or does it? Would someone like that simply be delighted in speaking of his farting endeavors after the fact? I see this whole thing remains mysterious. The client team probably assumed he didn't want to admit to farting in an important meeting. And they just didn't believe him because he'd cried fart too many times before. So the op was mortified about her boss farting, but it turns out the client thought it was coming from their side. This is insane. What are the chances both bosses were in on it and having a fart battle to the death? Honestly, I think it had to be both of them. I wouldn't be surprised if they emboldened each other even if they weren't feeling competitive about it. But I am sympathetic to the op. I would be completely unamused and grossed out by this entire situation. That's the impression I got. Op knew it was their exec, but the client assumed it was theirs. This Ops exec has a win problem, but the client's team isn't upset by it because they think it's their boss doing it, and fart jokes are a thing for them, so his denial just makes him seem more culpable. Which is all a hilarious coincidence.